My name is Kayla Benton, and if there is one lesson my childhood carved into me, it is this. Silence does not protect you. It only trains people to ignore you. I grew up believing that quietness was the safest way to exist, that the less noise I made, the fewer conflicts I would trigger. But in a house where volume was mistaken for value, my silence became the easiest target for judgment. The moment everything shifted came years later, at Thanksgiving dinner in Boise. I was 28, sitting at a long table filled with warm food, cold tension, and my extended family. I knew how these gatherings usually went. Belle, my sister, would dominate the room with her dramatic updates, Mom would beam proudly at her, and Dad would nod along as if agreeing was his job. I had mastered the art of sitting quietly, smiling politely, and shrinking into the background. But that evening, Mom decided to do something she usually did only in smaller, more casual ways. She chose to embarrass me in front of everyone. She lifted her glass, scanned the table, and said in a calm, controlled voice, "Some people in this family understand what hard work looks like. Just look at your sister. Maybe others should learn from her." Then, with deliberate precision, she turned her eyes toward me. "You're the laziest person at this table." Her words weren't loud, yet they carved through the air like a knife. I felt my chest tighten, but I didn't flinch. Beside her, Belle smirked, a slow, practiced expression of victory she had been using since we were children. She took a sip of wine as if celebrating another performance well received. In the past, I would have lowered my head, swallowed the hurt, and pretended it didn't matter. But something inside me had been shifting for months, building like pressure beneath the surface. And this time, I didn't fold. I placed my hands gently on the table, looked straight at Mom, and said clearly, "Then this lazy one will stop paying $4,500 of her rent every month." Belle choked instantly, coughing so violently that her glass nearly slipped from her hand. The room froze. Not dramatically, but heavily. Forks hovered above plates, conversations collapsed mid-sentence, and every pair of eyes turned toward me as if seeing me for the first time. But my story didn't begin at that table. It began years earlier, inside a quiet house where noise was currency and silence was worthless. Growing up, I learned how to complete chores before anyone woke up, how to clean spaces no one noticed, and how to fix problems before they became visible. I didn't brag about it. I didn't announce when I finished something. My effort lived in the background. Belle, on the other hand, learned how to turn every small action into a show. If she washed a single dish, the entire house knew. If she helped with a tiny task, she described it dramatically. How stressful it was, how exhausted she felt, how proud everyone should be. Mom loved it. Dad believed it. In their eyes, Belle was hardworking because she sounded hardworking. I, on the other hand, was invisible. My silence made them assume I did nothing. So the word lazy started appearing in small jokes, sarcastic comments, and subtle comparisons. Not because I failed, but because I worked quietly. That shaped everything. By the time we became adults, the pattern was complete. I built a stable, quiet life. My work required long hours, deep focus, and mental discipline. Not the kind that created dramatic stories, but the kind that built savings, security, and independence. I didn't boast about my accomplishments because modesty was my default setting. Belle went the opposite direction. She chased image-based jobs, events, promotions, opportunities that depended on who noticed her rather than what she produced. She bounced between gigs, collected contacts, and made her days sound urgent, important, glamorous. Mom believed every word. Dad admired the energy. And I remained the quiet, unnoticed one. The day Belle called me crying about her rent, everything changed. She said her commission was delayed. Her landlord was impatient. She felt humiliated. Without thinking, I transferred the money. She thanked me through shaky breaths, promising it was temporary. It wasn't. 1 month became 2. Then 3. Then almost a year. I adjusted my life around her rent, canceled my own plans, spent less, lived smaller. And no one knew. No one asked. No one cared to understand. Because my sacrifices were silent. Because my help was invisible. Because in my family, only loud stories earned value. But slowly, as I kept paying her rent, something inside me hardened. Not into anger, but into clarity. I began to see the imbalance. The pattern. The quiet injustice. Yet I still stayed silent. Until Thanksgiving night, when silence finally cracked. Because that dinner was the moment I realized something life-changing. Silence may keep the peace, but it also allows others to define you. And I was done letting anyone define me. After Thanksgiving night, after my words fell into the room like a silent earthquake, something inside me shifted permanently. But the truth is, the breaking point didn't happen all at once. It built slowly, quietly, just like every burden I used to carry. The weeks leading up to that dinner had already changed me in ways I didn't fully understand at the time. My job, for the first time in years, began to acknowledge me, really acknowledge me. Not with loud praise or public applause, but with meaningful recognition, the kind that sinks into your bones because it's real. My supervisor called me into a meeting one afternoon, sunlight filtering through thin blinds. He told me how my consistency had fixed long-standing issues no one else had noticed, how my work created stability across the team. I nodded softly, the same way I always did, but something inside me warmed, a quiet validation I had been starving for without realizing it. For the first time, someone saw the invisible work I had been doing all my life. That new confidence was fragile at first, but it grew every day. Small acknowledgments at work, tiny moments when someone said, "We rely on you," or "You always handle the tough parts." Those words built a structure around me that my childhood home never provided. But while my work life gained stability, my personal life began to strain under the weight of Belle's constant demands. Her texts shifted in tone. At first, they were emotional, fearful, apologetic, full of promises. Then they became familiar, comfortable, casual, as though my help was not help but expectation. And eventually, they turned entitled. She no longer asked, she informed. No more, thank you. Only next month will be better. Only, just one more time. Only, I'm so close to a breakthrough. A breakthrough that somehow never arrived. Meanwhile, I adjusted everything around her needs. I stopped buying things I wanted. I delayed every personal plan. I stopped saying yes to outings. Even small purchases became calculations. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I was being a good sister. I told myself this empathy made me strong, not foolish. But every month, a tiny part of me hardened. It was not anger. Not yet. It was awareness. Then came the conversation with my best friend, Tessa. We were sitting in a cozy corner of a cafe that smelled like warm sugar and cinnamon. She watched me stir my coffee with too much tension, saw the exhaustion in my fingers before I ever said a word. And she told me something simple, something that would reshape everything. Helping someone shouldn't require you to disappear. I stared at her, silent, because no one had ever said that to me. Not once. Not in my entire life. I'm not disappearing, I tried to say. But she raised one eyebrow, the kind of look only best friends can give, and replied gently, "Then why do you look smaller every time I see you?" Her words didn't break me. They revealed me. After that day, I began to notice everything I had ignored before. I noticed how Belle's emergencies always arrived at convenient moments for her. I noticed how her stress sounded rehearsed, almost scripted. I noticed how my phone buzzed only when she needed something. I noticed how none of her opportunities ever produced results. I noticed how easily she accepted help, almost too easily. I noticed how my mother praised her non-stop, describing her life as ambitious, exciting, courageous, while ignoring the quiet sacrifices I was making. Mom didn't know I paid Belle's rent. Dad didn't know either. But both of them adored the illusion she presented. And that illusion had been fed by silence. My silence, for years. As Thanksgiving approached, my mother slipped into her usual holiday performance. She decorated the house, planned elaborate meals, rehearsed what stories she would tell guests, and, of course, highlighted Belle's successes. Meanwhile, she asked me nothing. Not about work. Not about life. Not about me. I had become the background character in my own family. But this time, instead of feeling invisible, I felt something different. I felt done. Quietly, without confrontation, without drama, I began establishing boundaries inside myself. Invisible lines, but strong ones. Lines that said, "This is not my responsibility. This is not my burden. This is not my debt. This is not my role anymore." By the time I arrived at Thanksgiving dinner, the shift inside me was complete. I didn't go there planning to reveal the truth. I didn't intend to confront anyone. I simply sat down knowing I would no longer shrink. When Mom made her announcement, when she praised Belle and called me lazy, I felt the old wound trying to reopen. But my new boundaries held. I didn't break. I didn't bow. I didn't swallow my hurt. Instead, I spoke a single sentence that shattered years of silence. "Then this lazy one will stop paying $4,500 of her rent every month." The moment the words left my mouth, everything changed. The room froze. The illusion cracked. And a lifetime of quiet burdens finally became visible. It was the beginning of the end of my silence, the end of their narrative, and the end of the role I had been forced into my whole life. The hours after Thanksgiving dinner were louder than anything I had ever heard in my parents' house. Not because people were laughing or celebrating or sharing warmth, but because every unspoken truth from the past decade was suddenly free, tearing through the walls that had held it in for too long. Mom was the first to explode. She stood near the couch, her voice sharp enough to slice through the air. "You embarrassed your sister in front of everyone. That's not respect, Kayla." Her anger didn't surprise me. She wasn't protecting Belle. She was protecting the story she had built around Belle. A story where Belle was the shining daughter and I was the quiet shadow. Interrupting that story felt like betrayal to her. Dad stood with his arms crossed, his voice low but heavy when he said, "We can't keep calling the truth disrespect just because it hurts." His words didn't calm the room. They deepened it. Because for once, he wasn't automatically siding with noise. He was choosing honesty, and honesty in our family was almost a foreign language. Belle's reaction was the most immediate. She stepped forward with clenched fists and tear-bright eyes, not from sadness, but from humiliation. Her voice rose, sharp and accusing. "You think you're strong now just because they heard you? You didn't expose me. You exposed yourself. You're selfish." Selfish. The one word designed to break me. But it didn't. I stepped fully into the center of the room. Not to fight, not to perform, but simply because I refused to stand on the edges of my own life anymore. My voice didn't rise. It didn't shake. "I'm not helping again," I said. "Not with money. Not with errands. Not with silence. Not with pretending. I'm done completely." Mom looked at me with shock that bordered on disbelief. "You're acting like you have no responsibility to this family." And for the first time, I answered her honestly. I took responsibility when no one asked. I paid for things none of you even knew about. And I stayed silent while it cost me everything. That's why this ends now. Dad shifted his stance, trying to find a middle ground that didn't exist anymore. "You're really willing to let this family fall apart over this?" I held his gaze. It was already falling apart. I was just the one holding it together quietly. Belle's expression changed then. Her fear turned into anger so sharp it felt like a blade. "If you walk away, Kayla, I'll make sure everyone knows who you really are." She wanted me to fold. She wanted me to be scared. She wanted me to go back to silence. But I didn't. "You can tell whatever story you need to," I replied softly. "But I'm done shrinking to make you comfortable." And that was it. The room went silent in a way that had weight. Heavy, thick, undeniable. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of truth. No one moved. No one defended her. No one attacked me. It was the sound of a family realizing that the quiet one they underestimated had finally stepped out of the shadows. I walked away, not fast, not dramatically, but with a kind of calm I had never felt before. When I shut the guest room door behind me, the house outside was chaotic and loud. But inside me, everything was still. For the first time in years, I wasn't drowning. Life after that night didn't become perfect. It became honest. The first thing I noticed was the quiet. Real quiet. Not the suffocating silence I grew up with, but the peaceful kind that comes from not carrying anyone else's responsibilities. I woke up without the anxiety of checking my bank account. I slept without analyzing my sister's problems. I worked without the weight of guilt on my shoulders. I finally had space. Space in my home, my mind, and my heart. Belle, however, didn't adjust easily. Without my monthly payments, her lifestyle collapsed quickly. She lost her expensive apartment and had to move into a smaller place, one she actually had to budget for. For the first time in her adult life, she had to face consequences. Mom struggled, too. She couldn't control the narrative anymore. She tried blaming me, tried defending Belle, tried reshaping the story so she didn't have to admit the truth. But reality refused to bend this time. Dad kept a distance. Not out of anger, but out of discomfort. He sent short messages, checked in lightly, but avoided deeper conversations. He wasn't ready to confront how blind he had been. And I stayed steady. I didn't return to the role of rescuer. I didn't offer help. I didn't fall back into silence. I protected my peace like it was oxygen. Because it was. There was no apology, no dramatic reunion, no healing speech. Just distance. Clean. Calm. Necessary distance. I learned something I wish I had known years earlier. Setting boundaries with family is not cruelty. It is self-respect. And when you stop letting people define your worth by how much you sacrifice for them, you finally understand something powerful. Peace isn't earned by suffering. Peace is protected by clarity and courage. My silence no longer hides me. It frees me.